Hey everyone, I'm Father Alexander, and you're probably used to me waiting a moment and allowing for my partner Dave Marshall to say he's Dave Marshall, and then we introduce something called a bridge between. But this is something, as they say, completely different. This is one of my personal projects called Don't Swim Alone. It's a project that I created about a year and a half ago to help priests, to help clergy who are suffering from burnout, from stress, anxiety, who need that boost and encouragement in their spiritual life. And every 2 weeks or so, we're trying to build up our posting of these videos. I'm going to be interviewing clergy and inviting you, if you are somebody who is watching this who is a priest, to write in and say that I can interview you, because we want to know how you're doing and how you're dealing with this thing we call ministry, because we know it's not easy. But to get us started, and because I believe that you should never ask someone to do something that you yourself are not willing to do, today I'm going to be interviewed for the Don't Swim Alone podcast and project. And who else better and who gentler and who will hold me more accountable than one of my best friends, Dave Marshall. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Alex. Don't Swim Alone has become incarnate.
Mm. Well,
Yes, it is.
we've been doing a blog for a while,
Right?
but
But
I
now
feel
it's fleshy.
this is kind of the next step in the adventure.
Yes. And for those playing Don't Swim Alone bingo, if fleshy was the middle square, you just got it. So you're welcome.
There you go.
Can we have a little fun with this? I mean, you would expect
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
for me to interview you, I'm going to have a little fun.
If we don't laugh somewhere along the way, then we're not clergy, because where there's ministry, there's got to be laughter.
Right. Because there are tears too.
Exactly. And we're going to talk about that.
So I'm waiting for you to hand me over the reins, and then I will dive in.
You know what? Take it away. It's all yours.
I first met Alex at a clergy conference, and I just instantly knew you and I were going to be friends. And I'm really glad that you were here and that I get to interview you and talk about this. So the first thing up, Alex, is what in the world are we doing? What is this thing about Don't Swim Alone?
So about, I want to say 8 years ago, I attended a Credo conference. And for those of you clergy who may not know, it's a conference, I believe, put on by CPG, right? Is that correct?
As far as I know, yes.
I believe it is put on by CPG, the Church Pension Group, right? Who we're going to be interviewing very soon. And
and that's a question that we can have for CPG, but talk about Credo. But you were saying you were exactly. At Credo 8 years ago.
They had us out at this beautiful camp in Alabama. And as I walked out to the lake, they had this wonderful sign that said, "Don't swim alone," which is just, it's one of those phrases that's going to stick in your head a little bit. But at the end of the conference, they gave us a little coaster with the picture of that sign. And since then, it's been planted within me somewhere along the way that I wanted to do something with that. And the way it really developed was, of course, during what we in the Episcopal Church call COVID tide, in that 2020, 2021 time, that we saw the closing of the churches. We saw so much stress among clergy and lay leaders. And that was the time that I really began to experience what I would call a real breakdown within me, spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally. I experienced a deep breakdown. And as I began to look around to the clergy I knew, it really hit me that I wasn't alone, first of all, because I have so many people who care for me and so many people that I care for. But also, they were experiencing these things too. Often in isolation, often not being able to talk to somebody about it, because so many clergy work alone. They're lone rangers. Sometimes not even being able to talk to their own ecclesiastical authority about it, much less congregation or, a member of the vestry or something. So this project was created over time because I don't want to see people swim alone. I don't want people to navigate these waters of ministry by themselves, to know that they're not alone and that there's somebody who cares, not just me, but there's other people who are involved in this project who care deeply about them, not because we want to make them a better priest that's a good idea, not because we're selfish and we want something for ourselves, just because we want them to know that they're being heard.
Good. The coaster that says "Don't swim alone." Let's talk about the bad news before we talk about the good news.
Mhm.
What is swimming alone, and why should one not swim alone?
Well, I think swimming alone takes the shape in ministry of a few things that we tend to do. The first one is that many clergy in the Episcopal Church and around a lot of denominations, we see this, that they are alone in their parish as the only clergy person. Yes, there are lay leaders. Yes, there are other people who are invested in the effectiveness and success of ministry, but there's a loneliness that's involved in being that lone priest, that lone pastor in a congregation. And so oftentimes swimming alone means that we can't talk to people about things that may be bothering us, and not just
Can't,
professional things, but also
can't, or
personal things.
don't?
Go ahead.
Is it that we can't talk to others, or that we don't talk to others?
Sometimes we feel that we can't, and sometimes
Okay.
we just don't. We
Okay.
haven't built that habit, or maybe we've reached out and gotten rebuffed, or we've
Okay.
reached out and had our confidence abused. Something we
Hmm.
said that was confidential was used against us. There's all
Hmm.
types of ways that this can manifest itself. So one way is just the communication is not there. The second one is that when we feel that it's all up on us, that we're the ones carrying the burden of making ministry happen, which we know is not supposed to be the case. But at the same time, we know that when Sunday rolls around or Easter and Christmas roll around, there's some things that we just end up doing because we may not have somebody there. Bishop Sharf, our diocesan bishop here in Southwest Florida, showed the statistic that the average size of a congregation in the Episcopal Church is 39 people. How many volunteers does that translate to
Hmm.
when you talk about pushing forward the goals of ministry? And so it can be very lonely when you feel like you're doing everything. It can
Hmm.
feel very lonely when you're the only one who's thinking about certain problems. So
Hmm.
that's kind of the second way. And I think the third way is when we feel that our colleagues are not our companions in ministry. One of the things that I worked very hard against, and I'm very proud that other churches with whom I worked hard against this too. When I was the dean of the deanery in St. Petersburg, there were 5 or 6 Episcopal churches in a very small area, and there was no getting around it. People would go from one church to another, and there was a sense of competition. We
Hmm.
really pushed back against that. We wanted to collaborate with each other, but not everybody has the benefit of being around people who are willing to collaborate and who are willing to share. And so sometimes you feel that that person that you could be just 5 miles from or a couple miles from, you want to collaborate with them. You want to go have lunch with them, but you may not have that relationship. And I've benefited so much from mentors, priests who are much more experienced than me, people who've sent me off to seminary who are clergy. And I know that not everybody has that. So out of an act of gratitude, I want to open that door for other people.
So, what happens when somebody swims alone? And I mean literally swimming. If somebody's
Well,
swimming alone, what
yeah,
can
I mean, if
happen?
if you're swimming alone, I mean, I'm writing a little bit about this right now. You're
Hmm.
taking your life in your own hands.
Hmm.
I mean, if you are
Because what
swimming
can happen?
alone and there is no one around you, even if you are, and you and I have talked about this, you can be the most experienced swimmer. You can be a
Hmm.
professional lifeguard. Olympic athletes can also drown.
Hmm.
Olympic swimmers can also drown. And so when we talk about the reality that swimming alone means that you look around and there's nobody there,
Hmm.
you are really being in danger. And we talk about the danger physically of swimming alone, but in ministry, there's a lot of spiritual danger in swimming alone, because we are meant as Christians to live and work and have fellowship in community. And
Hmm.
when that's not there, the evil one definitely wants to take advantage of that.
Hmm. So, when you say don't swim alone, you're also saying don't drown.
Yeah, don't allow yourself to drown. Don't allow yourself to be weighed down.
Hmm.
It's about knowing our limits. It's about, like, I'm not a good swimmer, which ironically, I mean, I grew up in South Florida almost my whole life. My family is from 2 different islands, and I'm not a good swimmer. Figure that out, right?
Right.
But I know my limits, that if all I know how to do is doggy paddle,
Hmm.
I'm not going to go try to, swim in the surf out to that buoy out there that's 2 miles away.
Right.
If I know that health wise, I'm not in a good place right now, either mentally, physically, emotionally, it's not time to try to swim by myself. It's time to swim with other people around, or to help, to allow other people to lift me up in my swimming journey.
Hmm. Another reason for don't swim alone is so that you can tell the authorities where the body went down.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay. I mean,
exactly.
I'm calling it the way it is.
Yeah.
And I was a camp counselor. I was trained as a lifeguard at Camp Houston in Western Washington State. And
Mhm.
we had rivers, and you don't swim alone because you have to tell them where the body was last seen. That it's very important. I know of bishops who have had to do, metaphorically speaking, a clergy person who drowned, and then to try to figure out where the body went. What happened to the church? Where did this person go? And it's so much better, obviously, swimming with somebody to be able to pass that along. And I'm sorry to use such extreme language, but this
No,
is ministry.
it's not
Burnout
using
happens.
extreme language, and let me tell you why. Because statistically, we are seeing, especially starting in 2020, we saw so many clergy leave the ministry.
Yeah.
They were burned out. They were like, I can't do this anymore. I cannot run a church this way. I am not feeling supported, or I'm just, you know what, I'm getting close to retirement and I'm done.
Hmm.
But sadly, there were many clergy who took their own life.
There
And
were.
that is absolutely heartbreaking. In several
Hmm.
denominations, we see articles like this. And the thing that always is so challenging for me is when I see this on Facebook or see this in the news, they show the picture of the clergy person in their vestments or in their clericals, and they're smiling. And
Yeah.
the question is always, why did they do it? How could they, have done this? How could we have let this happen? And I want to think back and say, when did the seed get planted of them being alone and not feeling that they had somebody to reach out to? Or if they did, what happened here that this terrible tragedy occurred?
Hmm. Part of scripture is when one suffers, all suffer. And when a clergy person takes their own life, I can tell you the entire body suffers.
Right.
So, um, so let's talk about your vocation, your calling into ministry, and what initially gave you this call into vocation.
Well, I'm one of those kids. I grew up in South Florida in a place called Carroll City, Opelika, and then we moved to Hollywood. So those of you who are familiar with that geography of South Florida. But I started at going to Catholic school, K through 12, but it began for me on a morning when we had Mass. We had Mass once a week on Wednesdays. And I was sitting in the pew, about 10 years old, and somebody said, "We're missing an acolyte. Get up and come over here." And I said, "I have no idea what that word means. I don't really go to church that much." And they said, "Well, just carry this big old cross and it'll be fine." And the cross that I carried was all brass. I mean, the handle was, oh, this thing was heavy. And I was told, "Don't drop it because you'll hit the person in front of you in the procession." And what really struck me was when the time came for the Mass itself and the priest was doing the consecration of the elements. For the first time ever, I could see what the priest was doing with their hands. And that stuck with me for the rest of my life. I was so fixated on what was happening in that sacramental moment, which I didn't have the language, of course, for it. I have it now. But it really enthralled me and attracted me into a relationship with God, which I didn't even know what that was. And so I went home, told my mom, and she said, "Okay, well, let's get you trained to be an acolyte." And, the rest, as they say, is history in terms of starting that part in my life of serving within the church. And I did that all the way through college. I went, like I said, to a Catholic high school. And then a real change occurred for me when I went to college because I went to Florida State University, which at the time they were trying to dissipate this um, categorization, but we were the number one party school in the country. And I did witness a lot of why that is or was the case. So when I came into college, I kind of fell away from the church for a while, discovered girls and alcohol and all these wonderful fraternity parties and things. Um, and I fell away from what it meant, I think, to have a serious faith. When I got to my junior/senior year, I met a young lady who was very into church, and so I began to come back into the church. And I believe God used that, of course, as a means for me to come back into the church. But I began to ask really important questions because I had been taught my whole life certain things, and I didn't know if it was I who believed them or if my parents were believing for me, if the church was believing for me. And I was so thankful because there was a monk, a brother named Brother Sam, as part of this ministry at the cathedral, the Catholic cathedral there in Tallahassee called St. Thomas More. And he said, Alex, ask as many questions as you want. You're not going to be the one who breaks Christianity. You're not going to be
Right.
the one who suddenly discovers the archaeological fact that sinks all of us. So, don't worry about it. And because I was able to ask those questions and do research for myself into the scriptures and read so much of the Bible in a way that I hadn't read before, I became, in my mind, kind of a real believer. I became born again in that sense.
Hmm.
And I recommitted my life even more to Christ. I discerned a call to the priesthood within the Catholic Church. And when I came back to South Florida to live, I thought that was going to be the path. And then just as I was getting ready to kind of make that leap, so to speak, a week later, I met my wife. So it kind of derailed it a little bit.
Right.
And it was actually a moment of deep mourning for me because I said to myself, I'll never be a priest. Now I'm
Right.
making this sacrifice within the Catholic Church that I will never be ordained, which took a while for me to kind of get over. When I was going through a master's degree in theology at St. Leo University up here in this part of Florida, I was already um, finding things that were causing me to break away from the Roman Church. Some of it was how my family was being treated. We had small children at the
Mm.
time. Some of it was theological that I just couldn't reconcile. And then one of my favorite moments is I met a woman in my class who said she was getting ready to be ordained. And just kind of like something in my head went, what? Like, can you do that? Does the Pope know you're doing this? And when I, took her out to lunch and we began to have this wonderful friendship and conversation, she said, no, I'm in the Episcopal Church. And I said, I don't even know what that is. I've never heard of it, which always shocks people when I tell people that now that I'd never heard of the Episcopal Church, even growing up in Florida. And getting to know her pushed me to attend my first Episcopal church. And that's where the real path took on. So I went through the ordination process, went to seminary, and then really began to live into this vocation.
Wonderful. Is it there that you would say you felt the Spirit really speaking to you in the Episcopal Church, or was the Spirit already speaking?
I think the Spirit was already, speaking to me, but the Spirit was pushing me and pulling me into the Episcopal Church to say, this is where your call is going to be realized. This is where your call is going to be lived out. So I want you to pay very close attention to the people that I'm going to send into your life. And the Spirit sent some amazing, interesting, quirky people into my life to show me what church could be about. Because I'd had good experiences of church, but this felt different because it was a smaller community. Those
Mm.
smaller communities can be real assets.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we're talking about community and your call. But if we can shift gears for a moment, you're ordained, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and um, then later on, you started a program called Don't Swim Alone, which tells me you know what it's like to swim alone. And you talked about what you experienced during COVID and that sort of collapsing feeling on the inside. And so that tells me that ministry, and this is something I know already,
Mm-hmm.
ministry can be a profoundly lonely vocation.
Yeah.
Tell me about how you've experienced this type of lonely and isolation side of ministry.
I think that I have experienced aspects of that loneliness from the beginning, because there are ways in which we are living out our call, our vocation, our formation. Even in seminary, there are times when we realize there are things that depend just on us. That sometimes it is just us and God, and we are working through this together, even though there are other people around us.
Mhm.
I think probably, yeah, go ahead.
How can that be isolating when you're in community and you're studying and there's
Oh,
things
yeah.
that you just have to do? Tell me how that can be isolating and lonely.
Well, I think it can be isolating and lonely. Let's just kind of start with seminary for example. You're pushed into this community if you go away for seminary, as I did up in Tennessee in Sewanee, YSR. When I land there, I don't know anybody. So it's kind of like high school all over again, trying to figure out what table to sit at or where to sit in the chapel. And you also begin to realize that each person has their own path. They also have been called. They have a journey that they're making. And so as you try to build some of these friendships and relationships, you also realize that as a person who is seeking to be ordained, there will always be an aspect of fellowship that can be isolating. And let me give kind of an example in that we can sit here and we can talk about problems, right? You and I right now can sit here and talk about problems, but there's always going to be parts that we just know that's between us and God.
Mhm.
That there's just some things that are within our inner prayer, within our inner temple, as we might say.
Mhm.
But also sometimes as I go back to kind of talking about those other elements, we recognize areas where there's sometimes communities where we find a lot of competition, where we find that, oh no, we are actually all sinners here and we're falling short of the glory of God. And so we may not be treating each other very well because we disagree on any variety of topics. Yeah.
Are you saying that competition that we can experience in ministry starts in seminary with formation?
I think it can start at any stage. If you are in a church, you can experience competition. But within seminary, they do grade you.
Oh, yes, they
There,
do.
there
Yeah.
are grades, and so there are people who are like, I got an A, and I got a B minus or something like that. But also, they liked this person's sermon in class better than this other person's
Yeah.
sermon, or so there's all types of opportunities if we're not careful that there can be competition.
Mhm.
Um, the key is to recognize that at the end of the day, how much is this really going to matter? How much is
What
this
part?
really going to what?
The grade or
Well,
the
the grade.
work or
At the end of the
okay.
day, we graduated. That's the
Right.
most important
Right.
thing. And then, of course, we have God's own exam, the general ordination exam, where there's a
Mhm.
lot of competition I've seen around that, where people are like, well, I've got, 7 out of 7, and I got 5 out of 7. And, it's like, does it really matter? You know, I met a priest who went 0 for 7. He did not get a single answer right on the general ordination exam. And I would rather have him at my bedside than
Oh,
the one
yeah.
who went 7 for 7,
Right.
because
Yeah.
one of those individuals that I met did not have a good bedside manner.
No.
Doesn't mean they couldn't in the
Right.
future, but in that moment, I'm like, I would rather the 0 for 7 guy,
Mhm.
be my pastor.
Right.
And so because we have to be careful of that sense of competition, it can be very lonely. I think also for me, I was learning to build the vocabulary of asking for help. I was learning to build the vocabulary and the muscle memory of being able to reach out for help from people who I didn't know very well and were building relationships with.
Mhm. Good. So what is the most profound moment of isolation you have felt? And so how long have you been ordained?
I've been ordained about 11 years now.
Oh, yeah. So in the
Yeah.
last 11 years, tell me the most profound, isolating moment or experience that you've had.
There's a couple. I want to give one that was not related to COVID because I think COVID is just a very specific time
Right.
that was unique. There was one that I think, and it didn't last very long, but there was a moment of isolation that I experienced the first time I became the priest in charge of my former parish, St. Vincent's Episcopal Church in St. Petersburg. And it was this sense of, oh my goodness, they're looking at me for the answers. Because I would get like a million questions like, do you want to do it this way or do you want it that way? Have you thought of this? And I just kind of wanted to close the door to the office and be like, overload.
Hmm.
I felt isolated by the fact that I had been set aside for this ministry in
Hmm.
such a way that the expectation was so high for me to know. And that's natural. When anybody takes on a new job or a new call, they want to ask you questions. They want you to kind of breathe into this, what you're going to do. But in that moment, I looked around and I was the only one there with whom I could really talk about this style and sense of leadership. The
Mhm.
good news is that I picked up the phone, I called another priest, and I said, okay, this is what's happening. And they kind of talk, as we used to say, they talked me down out of the first floor window,
Mhm.
and began to help me see that this was going to be much more of a marathon than a sprint. This was going to be a long-term journey of leadership that I was just beginning, and that I needed to enjoy the fruit of this new fellowship that was being created, in the way that my family was being welcomed, which was so
Mhm.
precious for us. Um,
Mhm.
and it was a beautiful beginning. And after that, I began to also understand the ways in which I could put trust in other leaders in the parish, and to let them know, not so much ways that I was struggling, because I wasn't ready to do that right away, but ways in which I was wondering and hoping,
Mhm.
and ways that I was willing to listen to them. So I used that as an opportunity to become pastor and to become priest for them. So that's
Mhm.
kind of the first one, you know. Didn't know if you had a
There's
question on
more.
that. Okay. Well, I didn't know if you had a follow up
Yeah,
on that one.
you started a project called Don't
Yeah.
Swim Alone.
So
So
the
I
second
heard you
one,
talk about being
yeah,
overwhelmed, and I want you to talk about being isolated. You are the only one.
yeah.
Nobody understands what you're going through, and you have no place to turn.
So I think, for me, the most overwhelming moment came during COVID, when we couldn't visit people in the hospital. That there was a very limited number of people that were allowed, to visit,
Yep.
and that began to weigh on me. It was a
Mhm.
long process of weighing on me, because I love people. That's one of the reasons I'm in this vocation, and I also, want to love on people. I love to, care for them, because I believe that's what shepherding and pastoring is.
Mhm.
And there was one case where there was a parishioner, the wife of a parishioner as well, who went into the hospital, and we thought, okay, she's going in. This could be something normal. It could be something not normal. We don't know yet, but there's a lot of hope. And the hope, turned to dismay, as we
Mhm.
realized that she was not going to come out of the hospital, and that she was going to pass away.
Mhm.
And the loneliest moment for me was picking up the phone and calling the hospital and getting her room, and having the nurse hold the phone up to her ear as she
Mhm.
was unconscious and unresponsive,
Mhm.
and praying over her last prayers.
Mhm.
And that, something in me broke right there, because it felt like the whole world was unfair. It felt like the whole world was on its head. Like, this should not happen. This should not be happening to us right now. I should be in that room. I should be doing something, climbing in the window to be in that room, for her. And so praying over that and then hanging up the phone, um, I felt a profound sense of loneliness, that I just kind of sat in that room for a while, and
Mhm.
let that sink in. I didn't even start to pray. It felt that lonely, of just sitting in that room, having done that.
Mhm. Right. So, talk about your prayer life and how it has evolved.
The prayer is something with which I struggle. I know a lot of people say they struggle with it, and it's kind of like, oh, we all struggle with our prayer life. Like, I really struggle, with prayer a lot of times, because my mind moves so fast, kind of getting quiet and slowing down. But also, I've had to, over the last 12, 13, 14 years, um, needed to relearn how to pray. I think prayer life developing comes in stages of your life,
Mhm.
comes in stages of ministry. And
Mhm.
so the ways that we pray kind of at the beginning of our Christian journey, they can endure for a long time. But I'm not just talking about including new practices. I mean that just our mentality, the way our hearts have been affected, the way our minds think as we learn new things, all of those things contribute to the evolution of our prayer life. So for me, a lot of my prayer life was very formal. A lot of it was very, substantive in the prayer book, in terms of the morning and evening offices and those types of things, because that's what we pick up on in seminary. And I firmly believe that those prayers are important. There's a priest who says that the daily office is like the sandpaper that we rub up against to kind of, polish us, and kind of get some of those hard edges off of our spirituality. And so I agree with that. But I think I also began to take pages out of the books, not just of clergy, but of wonderful lay people who I've seen pray and have these deep, satisfying prayer lives. And so a lot of my prayer began to be more informal. It began to become conversational. So one of the things I've talked about in a recent workshop was that, to me, my favorite prayer is when I turn off the light at night, I put my head on my pillow, and I start talking to God, because nobody can see me but Him. Nobody can see me but God in that moment. Those are times when I've shed my tears. Those are times when I've laughed at the day. Sometimes my wife asks me, "What are you laughing at?" Or "What are you crying about?" And being able to have that sense of conversation brings me back to Paul's theology of prayer, of praying at all times. And I was just talking about this with an aspirant the other day, of saying it's wonderful that we have a prayer book with these said prayers and we use them for inspiration. But we need to pretend sometimes that Jesus is sitting in that chair across from us, and that we are having a conversation with somebody who's listening, and allow that to be our prayer. And that has changed a lot of my prayer life. And it's also changed a lot of how I help people and teach people to pray.
So, how has your prayer life helped you connect in with your own humanity and to be that fortress or that wall against isolation?
Um, I think instead of a fortress or a wall against isolation, I think prayer has become a bridge outside of me. And so by praying for others, we have a wonderful prayer list that we keep here of both members and friends and family, and using that to pray, but also actively praying for other people who I know are suffering.
Mhm.
Connecting myself once again back to my community, not just as pastor, but as friend, as fellow
Mhm.
Christian who I see suffering, and saying, "Lord, please be with this person. I don't fully know what they're going through. I can't possibly know that, but I want you to send some of my love through you to them." It's also kind of been the bridge where I feel the love of others in my community, former classmates, other people, that I open myself up and I say, "Lord, help me and allow me to feel this love that I know is out there, that there are people praying for me, and help me to be not just conscious of it, but to internalize spiritually the fact that there are those who care." And I think that really is what speaks against isolation. I think we become isolated when we believe that there's nobody there.
Mhm.
There could be somebody there, but if we don't believe that they're there, that
Mhm.
is where isolation can really take root.
Mhm. So, I've met your friend Brian from seminary,
Yes.
and yeah. Um, Uh, I didn't have the same seminary experience as you. I
Mhm.
didn't develop the same type of friendships and connections that you have.
Yeah.
But you have also, outside of seminary, now in ministry, you have cultivated authentic friendships where you can be fully human and not just the clergy. How did you do it?
I want to say trial and error, because when, like I said, making friends, even as an adult, can be very challenging. I give the image of that kid in the cafeteria on the first day of school, which, God bless him, my nephew, who is 16 now, just experienced that, starting a new school year, and none of his friends were at his lunchtime. So he was freaking out, you know. So some of that is the trial and error of, you open up a little bit, you make yourself a little bit vulnerable in the approach, and you listen and you try to make conversation, and then you begin to see where that person is in their life. Is this a season in their life where they're accepting a friendship? Or is this a season in their life where they just need to be prayed for and they're kind of to themselves? And respecting
Mhm.
that, we need to respect one another's spaces. Not everybody wants to be my friend in that way.
Mhm.
But the trial and error also comes in that we have to keep trying. Clergy conference, diocesan convention, clergy retreats are all opportunities for us to take that step and say, "I don't know you very well. Why don't we sit together today?" And just be open. But I also recognize Not everybody is ready to do that if they've been hurt, or not everybody's ready to do that because they might be an introvert or other factors.
Introverts can become great friends with others.
Hmm.
So,
But just getting that openness of I'm willing to
speaking
talk.
on behalf of
Yeah. Well,
introverts that way.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So Mel Robbins, who wrote the book Let Them, she talks about friendship and that there are three keys to making friends as adult.
Hmm.
The first one is there has to be an energy. When you meet with somebody, there's just an energy. Number two is you have to have shared experience or shared
Interest.
things, that there
Yeah.
has to be something common. And number three is location. You have to be near them. What can you
Yeah.
give as a critique as far as being a pastor in the church and making friends with other pastors? Does the energy, the things that make you connected, and then the location, can you critique that and how it works within your own ministry?
I would definitely critique that in the sense of location has become secondary in many ways. You and I, we don't see each other face to face all the time. A lot of what you and I do is phone calls, and the face to face is like this right now via our app.
Right.
And because you live in Bradenton, I live in St. Pete, but you work in Longboat Key, which I did drive out there once, but my goodness, that's not around the corner from where I work. And so the location, I think, requires that there be more energy and interest. It requires that there be a greater commonality of need and purpose. Because the clergy friends that I have that I am closest to, my friend Brian is all the way in Texas, and my friend Dan is all the way in South Carolina. Those are the two people I sat next to for 3 years in seminary, and we text and talk every day. It is just a practice that we have, cultivated over time. That this is a deep friendship and spiritual practice that we're going to exercise. And so, location can be a hindrance if we want to have a certain type of friendship. Like if
Mm-hmm.
you and I wanted to get together every weekend and have our families hang out, that could be challenging. I said, but I know that I can pick up the phone and call you. And I also want to just talk about something else, which is the kinds of friendships are important. So, for example, we all need acquaintances. We all need people that we get along with, that we go to an event, like I said, convention, clergy retreat, conference. And we just kind of, whenever we get together, we laugh or we muck about. And then, we may not talk to each other for a while. That's fine. But we also need the friendships that have a deeper seat in our hearts. And those are the people that you count on your hand, right? And maybe have a finger or two left over. Those are the people you call at 3 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at now in the crisis of humanity, in and outside of the church, but we're talking about within the church with clergy, many clergy do not have that person that they can call in the middle of the night.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have that person that they can say, I trust you enough that I can tell you that I am facing XYZ problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we need to fix. We need to
Mm-hmm.
change that.
I completely agree. If we can shift gears a bit, we've been talking about isolation, but there's another aspect to Don't Swim Alone, and that is clergy burnout.
Yes.
So, how would you describe what is clergy burnout? Is it for real? How can you sense it? Anyway, let me know whatever you think
So,
about clergy burnout.
when I hear the word burnout, I don't like to use a lot of buzzwords because I just feel they kind of get overused. The analogy that I like to make is from the Lord of the Rings, and if you've ever seen the Fellowship of the Ring, the first movie, or you've read the books, in the movie there's a scene where Bilbo is talking to Frodo, and he says, "I feel like not enough butter spread onto bread." And just that image of just like, I kind of run out of butter.
Mm-hmm.
I've run out
Mm-hmm.
of me. I've run out of energy. So when I think of burnout, it's not something that happens in a day. It is something that happens over the course of time, where we do not practice self-care, or we experience tragedy and disaster. I mean, think about all the hurricanes and tornadoes and floods that have just done so much damage across the world, but especially in our country here that we're talking about. So you have all these things that take place. Burnout happens over time, and there's a lot of different reasons. So, for example, I used to have a very bad practice of not taking all my vacation time, just because I felt like I need to be here, I need to be present. I can't leave right now. This is so crucial. If I leave, it's all going to fall apart. That was leading to my burnout. not
Oh
taking
yeah.
my Sabbath time, that day off that we're supposed to have. I think it's in there somewhere, one of the weeks or days of the week. Not taking that seriously, not going on retreats, spiritual retreats. Vacations are good, but spiritual retreats too, that renew and reinvigorate us and give us new experiences. So all of these things contribute to making sure we don't burn out. But one of the key ways that I knew I was burning out was, for me, it was manifesting itself that I was becoming much more emotional.
Hmm.
I had a very short temper. I would also become emotional as things were changing around me, or tragedy was happening, or there was a death in the parish. So I knew that I was becoming more and more sensitive to the stimuli around me, the spiritual stimuli and other things around me. And it started to manifest itself in that way. And also, I was dead dog tired. I was absolutely exhausted and did not see a place on the horizon when I was going to get a break. And I think that is really hard when you are working and you know that you're tired and you say to yourself, wait a minute, you're telling me the soonest I could probably take a vacation is X number of weeks from now? That can be disheartening. That can, because, hey, we're getting into the busy season. This is fall and fall programming. And, one thing I admire about my friend Brian is that he takes a retreat in October, like mid to late October. And I'm like, dude, how do you do that? That's like prime time ministry in your parish. And he's like, they can do it without me for that 1 week. This is
Hmm.
important. I come back renewed. And so, like, in that way, he's my hero, because I have not been able to do that yet. I don't know how to do that just yet for, in my own development.
Hmm.
But that's what takes time. So for me, burnout is when you look around and you can start to smell the singeing on you,
Okay.
that you're getting there.
So what are the warning signs?
I think some of the things I mentioned, everybody manifests differently, but there's some commonality. So when we talk about burnout, we talk about feelings of hopelessness that can
Okay.
arise because we're like, what's the point? Nothing that I do matters. To get very
Hmm.
negative, you lose that sense of hope in your ministry. You're focusing so much on what you're doing instead of what's happening in the community that is blossoming. Because
Hmm.
even when we're having challenges as a community, there's still good things that can be happening. We just got to be looking.
Hmm.
When we also have taken on too much, if we see that we've taken on so many tasks and have spread ourselves so thin that the thought of one more thing just makes us want to scream.
Hmm.
And that can happen because we don't know how to say no, which is easier said than done. I'm not always good at it either. But there are times when I've said to myself, if just one thing gets out of balance, if one thing gets out of whack, all of the plates that I've been spinning are going to come crashing down. If
Hmm.
that's the attitude that I'm having, I'm getting close to burnout because that's not a healthy attitude moving forward.
Hmm. So you said you're okay at saying no,
I said,
which
I'm,
your
I'm
friend's
working
going
on it.
to.
I'm working
I,
on
I
it.
was about to disagree with you,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
how? So you struggle with saying no.
Yeah.
How do you overcome that?
Um, I think I overcome it because some of the people that I work with, especially other clergy, this may sound kind of hokey, but sometimes they'll give me permission to say no. They'll say, Alex, when you encounter a situation like this, you have permission. You can say no. Like, God understands and gives you permission to say no once in a while, that you can't do this. And that can be challenging because sometimes the people who are asking me to do things are the people above me, the people I work for. Like, for example, I have a position with the diocese. And so sometimes it's, how do I say no to my bishop? I thought I kind of took a vow of obedience in that in that aspect. Um, but I also learn how to say no by, before I say yes, I have a conversation. I have a conversation about what the expectations are. This is why I'm glad I do have a good rapport with my bishop, that I can say, I want to say yes to this, but can we talk about what your expectations are? The amount of time you want me to spend on this project, and who am I going to be working with? I don't want to work alone. Who am I going to be working with that I can depend upon and who can depend on me? And so turning the yes or no into a conversation can be very helpful.
Hmm. So, what would you say to a priest or a pastor who is running on empty but afraid to stop or afraid to say no?
I would say that it's not for me to give permission to anybody to do anything, but in the same way that other people have given me permission to stop and to say no and to say I need help, please know that you have that permission. We cannot allow ourselves to not care for one another. And so if you are finding yourself in that place where you don't know where to turn, where you do feel burnout, where you do feel hopelessness, it's time to turn to somebody. And now I'm not going to guarantee that the first person you turn to is going to understand. Okay, that we need to say that out loud. The first person you turn to may dismiss you. They may say, well, you're just making this up, or you need to, buckle up, buttercup, as they say. All those things can be true. And if you get rejected or feel a sense of rejection, please continue reaching out. Find somebody else, find a clergy person. And, I want to kind of come back and pull back a little bit, that healthy living in ministry is also recognizing the tools and the people we need to be healthy. And
Hmm.
so I believe that every priest needs a spiritual director. We need
Hmm.
somebody who's holding us accountable spiritually and pushing us to pray and listening with the Holy Spirit in mind. I have a wonderful deacon from the Catholic Church that we do a Zoom, once a month for about an hour. And he has given me some tremendous tools for that. And, it works. He's never led a church. He's not an Episcopalian, but it doesn't matter. It actually is better that he's not in my discipline and my denomination, because he can look
Okay.
from the outside. The other thing is that I also believe that all of us need from time to time a counselor or therapist, and
Hmm.
I try to have that. I'm looking in the process of a new one because mine just kind of retired and moved away, so I'm in the process of finding a new one. But I tell that to my friends, and I tell that to many of my students with whom I work, is that we need to take the emotional trauma, the emotional baggage, the challenges that we're facing emotionally, and we need to share them with somebody who is trained to navigate that with us.
Hmm.
One of the
You bet.
biggest lies I told myself is that the problem is in my mind, which means I can use my mind to solve it. That is not the case. So,
No,
yeah,
no.
yeah,
Nowhere in scripture did Jesus say, I'm going to set up a church so that you can do everything with your mind. No, we
right.
depend on each other.
And
Speaking of the church,
well, the last one that you need
okay.
is also a good physician, a
Okay.
good physician that we see at least once a year to get that physical done, a physician that we are also accountable to, who's going to tell us it may be time to change our eating habits, or maybe time to change our exercise habits. Those kinds of things that we need honesty about, that we know deep down. Like, I know French fries are not my friend, right? But they're so tasty and I love
They
them.
are tasty.
They're
Yeah.
so wonderful. But I know that when I get the blood work back from my physical, the doctor's going to look at me and say, French fries, right? And I'm going to be like, yeah. So I need to
Wow.
get better on that. So
Okay.
I'm sorry. So,
Right.
so go ahead with the church.
Right. Well, so I had a friend who, a head of school, who was a little overweight, and he would go see his doctor, and every year his doctor would say, well, I see you're keeping your weight up.
Ouch.
It didn't work. It didn't motivate him to lose it. But so we've talked about isolation and burnout. We need to talk about unspoken or spoken expectations of what clergy have placed on them.
So I think that a lot of the conversation that we're having about expectations today has to take place in the context in which the church is finding itself. We've talked a lot about decline in the church. We've talked about the decline of the number of members in our churches, the decline of income. There are many churches that are just right at that cuticle, that right at the point of failure, or being insolvent, let's say. And so because of that, clergy who are being ordained into this reality of decline for many people face a lot of pressure. They face a lot of pressure to come in like a head coach of a football team and just turn it around, to do your magic, right? That's not realistic. Real lasting change takes years. I mean, deep seated spiritual change in a faith community takes years. It doesn't take days, weeks, or even months. And I'm learning this now. I've been here for a
Mhm.
year and a half, and we're experiencing this wonderful growth. Like young people are coming, and we're having more retirees show up, and just all this spiritual energy is taking place. But I know the deep-seated change is going to take much longer. And so
Mhm.
because of that, when we talk about expectations, when they put out a profile for who they want to hire, they might as well be Jesus. I don't know if Jesus could get the job at some churches that are hiring,
Mhm.
right?
Right. Right.
And so the expectations that we come with, we need to be honest and say, I'm good at this, I'm not good at that. If
Mhm.
your expectation is that we're going to add 150 members in a year, you are way off base. If you think we're going to suddenly create an endowment and have $1 million, I'm sorry, I don't think that's going to happen in the first 6 months. You think
Mhm.
I'm crazy, but there are some expectations that get listed that way.
Mhm.
Um, so those are
My
some of
favorite
this.
one.
Yeah,
My
go ahead.
favorite one was we are the pastor we seek can preach like Michael Curry, can have the humility of Mother Teresa, and can heal like Jesus. And I went, oh my gosh, are you kidding me?
Wow. So you're
Anyway,
telling so you're telling me that even Jesus couldn't preach like Michael Curry?
no, nobody can preach like Michael
Nobody can
Curry.
preach like Michael
Uh,
Curry. So,
no,
but
not
so
at all.
these are the things that we talk about. We talk about the spoken
Right.
expectations. Let's talk about the unspoken expectations. And I was working with a priest recently who was dealing with this because the congregation had gone through this change with the previous priest, and it had not always been healthy, the way they talked about money or the way they talked about pastoral care or things of that nature. And so they had the unspoken expectation that they were going to go and visit everybody, that they were going to go and build relationships with a specific group of people in the church or offer certain liturgies, but they never said it. And
Hmm.
so, because of that, they set this priest up to fail, to be ineffective in their position. And now that there's actually some dialogue building between them, between the congregation and the priest, some of these expectations are being adjusted. It's
Good.
also the expectations we as clergy have of our congregation. And we need to be careful about that, about how much we want to move them, where we think they need to be versus where the Spirit may be calling them. It's a two-way street.
Hmm. So do you remember when Elijah, the greatest of all prophets, when he burned out and he ran,
Yep.
and God's like, "Wait here for me," and then there was a fire, an earthquake, and a windstorm.
Mm-hmm.
When he first went into the cave, he said to God, "I'm the only one left. There's nobody but me, and everybody wants to take my life." And then he went through the fire, the earthquake, and the windstorm, and he came out same exact Hebrew words: "I'm the only one left. There's nobody but me, and they all want to take my life." That even the greatest of us can have these personal expectations of the prophet Elijah, that it is, I'm the only one left. I am the only one who can do this. And God said, you know what? You're right. Stay in the cave. No, okay. God didn't say that.
God didn't
No,
say that.
no. He said,
Um,
go see these people. You'll be surprised.
I want to tell a story that reminded me, that taught me deeply what it means that not only am I not alone,
Hmm.
but I'm not the only one working, okay, for the kingdom. So this is a hard story because I felt a lot of guilt about it. It was at my previous parish, and I was visiting somebody in a nursing home, which was right across the street from the hospital, where there was a patient parishioner who was kind of, their health was really fluctuating. We didn't know if they were going to die or not. I had visited them before, but it had been several days, and I wasn't sure what was going on, but I had not slept well in a few days. I was absolutely burnt. This was kind of in that
Hmm.
burnout stage that I was in. And I visited the person in the nursing home. And then I said, I could go across the street. It would take 20 minutes of my time. And I literally felt I couldn't bring myself to do it.
Hmm.
Right. So I went home. And about 2 hours later, I got a phone call that they had died.
Hmm.
And the guilt just washed over me. But what was interesting is that the daughter had said, but it's okay, because I called my friend up in North Carolina, who's a priest who works up there, and she prayed to mom. She prayed over mom. while we were in the room, and mom felt at peace. I could see it in her face, and
Mm-hmm.
then she died. And I wanted to cry because I felt so humbled in that moment to think it had to be me. I was the only one who could be there and be present. And God had said, you think you're the only one out here I got working? I got a whole crew out here who are taking care of my people.
Right.
You're not the only one." And I had to chew on that one for a while because
Mm-hmm.
I had this guilt, and I had this feeling of, had I abandoned somebody in their moment of need. But God really took me through that and said, it is a team. It is a team that I have
Mm-hmm.
assembled to work in my kingdom. So you are not the only one. Let this person have that moment with them that they needed too, because it was a family friend. Let them do that. And don't worry, you're going to do the funeral.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a moment for me that helped me realize that the idea of being alone, um, I had narrowed it down so much.
You did. Jesus is quoted with saying, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few."
Yeah,
And he didn't say the harvest is plentiful and the laborer is you. It's few.
right.
I know it
Exactly.
rhymes.
And
There are laborers. They're few, but they're around.
yeah. Well,
So
and also when, the apostles say, "Hey, we saw these people over here, casting
yeah,
out demons in your name. You want us to take care of them for you?" He's like, "Hey, yo, they're doing the work of the kingdom. They just may not be talking to me right now, but they're doing the work of the kingdom. Let them do it." You
you
know.
bet.
So I
Yeah.
think that's
Yeah.
that's the important part.
So how did you find healing in amidst in around all of the isolation, the loneliness, the burnout, the expectations? How did you find healing?
I think the healing came when I asked God to have a very strong conversation with me about where I was headed. I had to sit down and say, "Lord, I am lost. I am broken. I am alone, but I am yours." And so you're going to need, Lord, in this moment to be my comfort, to be my strength, because I have nothing. I feel as if I have nothing at all. My hands are empty, Lord. And that was very hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
It made me very vulnerable in the presence of God, but it was also a test of faith. And I feel that in that moment, because I said to God, "You are my portion, you are my strength," and all those wonderful things we hear in the psalm, that God said, "I will be those things for you." And
Mm-hmm.
so the comfort came in spiritually in that moment for me, but the comfort also came when I began to talk to people who I knew loved me and who I loved, and was being able to be open with them. And so doing that um, took courage, I think. Not that I consider myself a courageous person, but I think it took some resolve to say that I was going to do this and commit myself to a life of healing and a life of wholeness. And so I don't always get it right. I'm not always the healthiest person, but I do want to see other people find healing and wholeness in their life too.
Good. I have one more question for you, but I have a statement first and then a question. Alex, my friend, you are one of the most courageous people I know. Okay. You can't see it in yourself. We can see it. You are courageous. The way you live your life, the way you continually reach out and help, the way that you're going to school to better yourself, the way that you're doing school for ministry, and everything that you do, you are very courageous, and that's the spirit that God has put inside of you. And it's your humility, which I also love, which is you don't see it, and that's great. But you, my friend, are courageous.
Well, and my response, to that would be thank you, because I've had to learn how to say thank you when somebody says something nice, but also to say once again that I feel like it is God who's working in there. It is
Amen. It
God who's
is.
working in
Amen.
that.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean,
what's your last
if it's up
question
to
there?
you,
Yeah.
you would
Mhm.
just sit on your recliner and watch, Sports Center. But with God in you, you're out doing these things. So if I had a time machine and I could put you back 12 years ago when you're being ordained, what would you say to yourself?
Well, the joke answer that I was going to say was don't do it, don't do. No, just kidding. No, the what I would say to that version of me, and I saw a picture of me that day, and I just like, gosh, I don't. Who was that? Looking back, more hair, thinner, all that good stuff. Um, I would say what you're about to experience is one of the most profound pilgrimages and journeys that you will ever have in your life, that anybody can ever have in their life, because you are going to walk with God and other people on a path that leads with the cross to places that you don't know yet. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be fun. But you don't walk by yourself. Make sure you stay in sight of others. Make sure that you stay grounded, and make sure that you stay healthy. And I've talked a little bit about the not just don't swim alone, but don't walk alone, as
Mm-hmm.
well. And having walked that path and had friends who I've lost to health, or had friends who have fallen away sometimes from their vocation, it's humbling to see that the journey is, I'm still on the journey, and I want to be on the journey with God.
That's great. Uh, the Wizard of Oz, don't look at the man behind the curtain. The one thing about us ordained people is that we go behind the curtain.
Oh yeah,
Um,
we know how the sausage is made. You know,
yeah, that it's one of those things when we get together as clergy. One thing to bear in mind is that we all have seen a glimpse behind the curtain, and we all have felt a pull and a call to it. None of us are worthy of it. We will all fall short of the glory of God, but we have seen it.
and I think something I have seen in so many clergy that I've spoken to about this is that we may have a very tough facade, and there's a lot of courage in the ministry that we do,
Mm-hmm.
but there's also the feet of clay, and there's also a fragility within us that is actually our strength, because where weakness is, God can enter.
Mm-hmm.
Where strength already is in itself, God can't work. And so that's kind of the strange dynamic that I look at, in this, is that we're not trying to just make people stronger for the sake of being stronger. We're trying to help them see that the weakness that they feel is an opportunity for God to come into their life and to be present in them, in their ministry and in their relationships, so that they are ultimately boasting in the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, and I would like to boast about you and how awesome you are and what a great friend you are. And thank you for inviting me along this journey. I'm wondering, when you interview other clergy, how you're going to end the interview, because I'd like to see you do it now.
Well, the way that I would say the end of the interview, if I was interviewing you, is I would like to say thank you for coming on this show, coming on this podcast, and opening yourself up and allowing us to get a glimpse of what it's like to be you, to be you in this world that is challenging, to be you in a ministry that is so demanding, but also to see the ways in which God is just magnifying so much of his creation and his love and mercy and forgiveness through what you do. And that I'm thankful for that. And so I thank you.
Alex, I thank you. And I thank you that you've brought us around with your curtain to be able to show not only the weight of ministry, but also to show the joy and the healing that can be from it. The way that you've shown us how to connect with one another, and that we are not alone, and we're all swimming, and there's a baptismal thing in there too. But
Oh, yeah.
I thank you for showing me how to do that, and to be a good friend, and to walk with us. So may God continue to bless you in your ministry. May God bless this ministry of not swimming alone. And may God strengthen all of those who listen to your story and find solace and strength in the name of our Lord. Amen.
Amen. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to do from a practical perspective is, of course, like, comment, subscribe, all those wonderful things to kind of get this new podcast up and running. The website is called don'tswimalone.org. You can find my blog there, and you can reach out to me personally there if you'd like to have some type of pastoral conversation or learn a little bit more about professional development, which we didn't talk about today, but we want to talk about eventually. Our next interview that we're going to be doing is with a member of CPG, Church Pension Group, with you, Dave, are going to help me ask all the really interesting financial questions. And so if you've ever had a question for CPG, let us know, because they are really willing to pull back the curtain on what they do to help us see how we can be effective in preparing for our health and wholeness in the future financially. But in all those things, I want to thank you for listening to my story, and we'll catch you in the next one.